why did Mr. Vajpayee say do not cross the LOC? Now, if you expanded the war beyond where the Pakistani army was, then it would have become a regular, full-fledged war between two nuclear weapons countries. By not crossing the LOC, we saved many, many lives. Kargil town, on the other side of the river Kargil, you could see Pakistani bombs falling. We sent the tapes. The tapes were Musharraf in Beijing talking to the chief of the general staff in the Rawalpindi. So the Rashid was shocked, and therefore to talk, he said, let's take a walk in the garden. There's a very good fruit garden at the back of his house, because he was afraid. The Prime Minister, so that confirmed the fact that the Prime Minister is afraid to talk in his own house. He's afraid the army has tapped it. You can imagine how deep that state.
Hello, Namaste, Salam, Sushriyakal, Adab, Kencho. How are you doing, audience? We're back again on the book, The Years That Changed India, Vajpayee, along with the author, Mr. Shakti Sinha. We're here to talk on part 2. In part 1, we have covered some of the larger issues of Pokhran, his love for foreign affairs, and of course, the coalition pressures and how he was a statesman. Welcome to the episode, sir. How are you doing?
Thank you.
So today, again, we'll take leave from this book. Sir, if you would want to show it to the audience, the book. This is the book that we are talking about today. And we'll start off on February 2nd, 1999, when Shakti sir himself receives a call from Vivek Kaju, who is a top bureaucrat also, and he was in the foreign ministry. And he suggests a very unusual idea of going to Pakistan on a bus. And Shakti sir mentions that Vajpayee was not in Delhi. So how did that conversation between you and Vajpayee played out? And what did he do on that evening of February 2nd that brought the whole media attention to him?
You see, on that morning, the Indian Express carried a large interview, all of page 1 almost, a lot of inside pages, of the editor-in-chief Indian Express, Shekhar Gupta, with Nawaz Sharif, in which he mentioned that the shortest route to Delhi is via this and that, Lahore, and that he'll be very happy if Mr. Vajpayee visits Lahore also. So it was it was a newspaper thing only.
Mm-hmm.
And it was discussed in the External Affairs Ministry from what I gathered. And the stand they would take was that as and when a formal invitation comes, we'll respond to it, which is a standard bureaucratic line. Safe line, I'm not saying it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Vivek Kaju, handling Pakistan for a number of years and Afghanistan, very aware of the nuances, knew how Vajpayee was making that extra effort to improve relations with Pakistan, rang me up midday, I can't remember the exact time, and said, this is a golden opportunity. We should say yes immediately. It will change everything. And he said, I've tried within MEA, but the foreign secretary is not agreeable. We reached out to the principal secretary to the Prime Minister, Mr. Brajesh Mishra, again, an expert of foreign affairs. And he also felt, let us go with the MEA is doing. But Vivek was persistent and said, this is a golden opportunity, we must not. Mr. Vajpayee was not in Delhi. He had gone to his constituency, Lucknow. So I rang him up around 12:30 or so and told him that this is what has happened. And he was aware of the newspaper and that Vivek feels that we should say yes immediately. He said, theek hai. And he said, left it at that. So I thought things will happen. Around 1:30, he was addressing a press conference in Lucknow. And out of the blue, he just mentioned, and I'll be going to Pakistan. So, it was a very smart gesture taken on the spur of the moment. But yes, it was a built-up because talks had been going on. The idea of a bus trip, a bus journey linking Delhi to Lahore was there. In New York, in the meeting in September 98, Nawaz Sharif had mentioned that in 82 Asian Games, which was held in Delhi, he had driven to Delhi from Lahore with his wife to watch the games. And therefore, we should encourage more people-to-people movement, etc. A bus is a good idea. And that Vajpayee will go, and therefore the linkage came that Vajpayee will go by bus. And that is how it suddenly, from a small idea, it became a major game changer. And that's how it played out.
Right. And it was only in a period of 70 days that all the formal arrangements were done and all the informal arrangements, but necessary security arrangements did also take place.
Exactly. In fact, the most difficult part, of course, was we had to get an agreement on the bus. The two sides were talking, but they were talking normally, which takes a long time. Now, Indian government, Pakistani government, Delhi Transport Corporation and Delhi government the Punjab Transport Corporation of West Punjab, which is Pakistan. All this had to be tied up. And I must give them credit to the officials on all sides, our side, their side, that in this short period, they tied up all these. A lot of legalities are required. Insurance is there, this is there. All that was sorted out very, very fast. How to draw up a list of people to go there. And, security, of course, wasn't that, because obviously you are at the mercy of the host government, though you have your own people around you. But at the end of the day, the security is handled by the home government. How to delegation to fix up. In between, Mr. Vajpayee also traveled. We went with him. We went to the G15 meeting in Jamaica, then a trip to Trinidad, on return to Morocco, and then to Delhi. So it was a very short period of time, but we did a good job, I must say.
Yeah, and you said that the security is on the mercy of the host government. And when you reached Pakistan, there was all sorts of pulls and pressures from, I would for the time being say, social groups of Pakistan who did not like Vajpayee to be in the city. And on a humorous note, you say that you were given wines in your room, but that was not enough. But on that passing, how was the experience in the room when, because you accompanied him there and Nawaz Sharif and everybody was there. So how was the atmosphere in the room, and how positive did you feel that India-Pakistan relations can go from there?
Oh, very, very positive. Of course, there were sour tones. One, the three chiefs did not receive him at the border, which a lot of people commented on. I did not think it is so important. So this is at the border. Then we flew by helicopter from the border to Lahore, to the governor's house. There, the three chiefs were very much there. And later also, when we were chatting and having tea and coffee, they were very much there. The mood was very positive. Both Prime Minister Vajpayee and Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif were very, very keen that the two countries must work together economically to grow. That this is the 21st century now coming up. This is 1999 already. We cannot be mired in the past. We cannot be stuck in the past. We have to break out and go to a new future for our countries, for our people. And the room was definitely positive. Yes, the city of Lahore had some problems that day. Some jihadi groups were actually backed by the army, Jamaat Islami and others, by a couple of hours. But then the dinner went off very well, I must say. So there was minor tensions. At the back of the mind, you knew that this is not an easy journey. But at that moment, it felt very good. It felt that, yes, finally, we'll be able to travel on the same path together.
Right. And in that context, would you want to talk about the Minara Pakistani speech that Vajpayee delivers? Because I think that's very significant.
No, he did not deliver a speech at Minara Pakistan. He wrote out he just wished Pakistan, all the best in the visitors book at Minara Pakistan. Now, Minara Pakistan is important because it marks the location where the Muslim League in 1940 in their convention, national conference, asked that for basically Pakistan. They didn't use the word Pakistan. They wanted a separate homeland for the Muslims of India. So they set up the Minara Pakistan. So there he wished Pakistan all the best, which was significant because in a lot of the Pakistani elite and the Pakistani narrative, the idea is that India is not reconciled to Pakistan and that India will do everything to break up Pakistan. And here was the Prime Minister saying, no, please, we want you to do well. Please prosper. We want, so that's a different message. And that to come from a BJP, Hindu, Akhand Bharat. So that all kind of prejudice in the Pakistani mind. It was required to dispel that, and he did that. And later in the speech that afternoon, the speech was in the governor's house, the civic reception. That was a very good speech. He won over the crowd and says, people told me that by going to Minara Pakistan and writing that, you have given your seal of approval to Pakistan. So he said, देखिए, Pakistan को मोहर देने वाला मैं कौन हूँ? You are here. So, to say that, no, you don't need my mohr. You are there. So again, to reassure them that we are not interested in breakup of Pakistan. We want Pakistan to prosper. We want Pakistan to get out of the jihadi terrorism mindset. That was the message. And it was very well received, really well received by the audience.
Right. And there are a lot of incidents which are renowned incidents of Vajpayee ji's tenure. But there's an incident or a project we could say that is Kaveri River, which is a great achievement of his tenure, but is not much talked about. So could you talk a bit about it?
This is a very old 100-year dispute between what was then the Mysore state and as it was the Madras presidency, then the Madras province and Mysore province of India, and then of course Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. Kaveri Commission was there going on, and it had given an interim award. People disputed that, then gave another award. And the Supreme Court basically told the government, within 30 days, you sort it out. Now, very difficult disputes, a lot of hard work went into it. Mr. Jaswant Singh was involved in it. The Ministry of Water Resources was involved in it. They spoke to the two states, they brought some closer agreement. And then a meeting of the chief ministers was called. Of course, they are not just Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, but also Pondicherry and Kerala involved actually. Very minor, but they are also involved. So all four of them, how to seat the CMs together. And Mr. Vajpayee had a very good personal equation with Karunanidhi also. And so Patel was Chief Minister of Karnataka, was also accommodating. And through a period of this nice negotiation, with a view not to scoring a political point, but to coming together. And they found a suitable agreement. The details are not important, how many million acre feet, etc. But they're able to find a suitable agreement, understanding that Karnataka in upstream requires water, but Tamil Nadu, the downstream already has committed water needs because of irrigation. So they found a decent solution to it. Politically, it was very big success. But yes, his own alliance partner, Jayalalitha, then said it's betrayal of the Tamils. Well, obviously, she wanted to embarrass Karunanidhi. Her interest was not Kaveri or the farmers of Tamil Nadu. Her interest was political. She attacked it. Opposition was not happy about it. Why were they not happy? Because this was a success. And I think that that process building up, it was not that the meeting lasted 6 or 8 hours. It was important by itself. But the build up to it, which allowed all the parties to sit in a non-confrontation manner with a view to finding a solution and not with a view to scoring political points. So Mr. Vajpayee's success was that he was able to convey this message of problem solving and not scoring political points. And I think that helped. That I think was a very big achievement. But yes, you're right. Not many people talk about it.
Right. And as you talked about opposition, in 1999, when Ms. Jayalalitha withdrew her support from NDA, NDA lost its majority. And Mr. K.R. Narayan asked Vajpayee ji to prove his majority, which you said should have been asked by a parliamentarian. And Mr. Natwar Singh mentioned in his book, One Life is Not Enough, that Mr. K.R. Narayan was trying to pull Vajpayee government down. So what is your take on it?
In fact, yes, she pulled the letter she gave that I'm withdrawing support on the day Parliament was meeting. Now, normally, if the Parliament or State Assembly is not in session and the government comes into a minority, then the President of the Governor normally asks the Chief Minister, please convene a meeting of the State Assembly or National Parliament and get a vote of confidence. That is a normal method to do so. In this case, because Parliament are already convened, Parliament's business is set by the Business Advisory Committee of Parliament. And the right thing to do in such case was for opposition MP to move a motion of no confidence against the government. The standard norm is a motion of no confidence. In fact, confidence motion itself is an anomaly, but it has become into our active use. That should have been, but that would have exposed the opposition for lack of unity. So they did not want the opposition to move a motion of no confidence because then it would have failed. A motion of confidence by the government allows the opposition to come together. A motion of no confidence meant that the opposition must come together before and come to an agreement on what will happen now. We'll drop the government will fall, what happens then? That was not possible, and therefore this trick was done. President Narayan, I must say, to my mind at least, again, while forming the government and again here, to me, acted against the Constitution. He should not have done this. He should have allowed the House itself to decide through a motion of no confidence whether the government has a majority or does not have a majority. After all, presumption is that a government has a majority. You have to disprove it. So you don't have to prove it. And that is what I thought that was. And then, of course, the secretary to the president, Gopal Krishna Gandhi, as Natwar Singh writes in his book, was used to try and bring about opposition unity so that a replacement government could be formed. Now, for a sitting president to try to put opposition parties together to form a government, to me, again, was another sign, if any is required, that President Narayanan was definitely acting against the constitution.
When you pulled that government down, let's say when the government came down, instead of you pulling it down, the government became a caretaker government because there was no effective opposition, as you
Yeah.
mentioned.
Yes.
And in that caretaker government comes one of the biggest challenges any country would face, which is a war.
Yeah.
And you are very honest when you say that we were all caught napping. I think it's a very significant statement that you make. And when you are caught napping, let's say, how, and then this realization comes that a war has actually taken place because you are thinking that these are the Mujahideens. You said that it's a very unusual war that took place between India and Pakistan. Why don't you talk about it, that how that transition from recognizing it to be a aberration or a Mujahideen just coming in to accepting that it's a war, and then Vajpayee's statement that do not cross the LOC.
Very good. Thank you for the question. It's a very significant question because people don't understand it in what happened. The first message came out was that Mujahideen have occupied the heights. It was unusual because Mujahideen does not occupy territory, but we felt maybe they wanted to internationalize Kashmir, so they have done it. Slowly it came out when the fighting started and Pakistani soldiers died, and from their pockets you recovered their papers, we realized that they were not Mujahideen. They were the Pakistani Northern Light Infantry, which is a part of the Pakistani army. The officers are all from the Pakistani army. But Pakistan kept denying that these are not our people. They are the Mujahideen. So you have the Indian army fighting a Pakistani army. The Pakistani saying, "This is not my army." That's why it's very unusual. It was also therefore unusual that therefore Pakistan was not really able to, what should I say, press its point because it's the Mujahideen fighting, So that helped India, but also made life difficult for India in the sense that how much action should we take against them. And then when it was confirmed that it is not the Mujahideen, but the Pakistani army, then of course our defense was very good. The Indian armed forces, all three wings, the army, of course, the air force, which then came in a little later on, and the navy in almost blockading Karachi port. Amazing job the navy also did. People forget that also, how good the navy was in the Kargil war. Now, why did Mr. Vajpayee say do not cross the LOC? Now, at Kargil, you could not have crossed the LOC at the war zone because between the LOC and the Indian army was the Pakistani army. Crossing the LOC means at other places. Now, if you expanded the war beyond where the Pakistani army was, then it would have become a regular, full-fledged war between two nuclear weapons countries. This is the first time after 1967 when Russia and China had a small war on the river Usiri in Manchuria. This would have happened. This time the world would have immediately stopped the war, and India would have been in no position to say no to the world. We would have to say yes to the world. Today we could say no to the world saying stop the war. We said we'll stop the war only when the Pakistani army withdraws and goes back across the LOC. Because we didn't cross the LOC, the world supported us in the war for the first time. It did not support us in 1965. It did not support us in 1971, when we were stopping a genocide in Bangladesh, where 3 million Bangladeshis were killed, 10 million came to India. Even then, the world did not. The United Nations General Assembly voted 104 to 11 for a ceasefire. But the Security Council saw it and stopped it, so we were lucky. This time, what would have happened? The world would have said, stop the war, and we would have to stop the war. And therefore, by not crossing the LOC, we got the world's support. And finally, when Pakistan went to America for help, Americans told them clearly, withdraw. We will support you if you agree to withdraw. And the war ended a couple of months before it would have ended. In other words, by not crossing the LOC, we saved many, many lives. People don't understand. We said, oh, had we crossed the LOC, less soldiers would have died. No, unfortunately, that is not true. The war would have opened up other places and we would have been in serious difficulty. It was necessary to show that now that you're a nuclear weapons country, you're a responsible country, you're not a risk taker like Pakistan, an adventurous country which can lead to any kind of chaos. So you did the right thing.
Yes, and I think continuing on that, you said that Mujahideen controlled the mountains, which is unusual. Another thing that was probably unusual was a sitting prime minister to go to a site of war. And then probably there would have been a lot of security arrangements that you would have had to make because it was within the firing lines of the Pakistani territory. So talk about his visiting Kargil and how important was that.
Of course, it was important to visit Kargil. No, Labdra Shastri also went not to the war zone, but he went close to the border in 65, but not to the war zone. It was unusual. It was necessary because this is a different era. 65, 71 is gone. This is the television era by now. The world is watching you. You wanted to send your message to the country that this is a war for the whole country. This is not a small war happening in Kargil, and we must show our support to the Indian army to evict the Pakistani army. How do you get it against the Pakistani army? You had to build this narrative, which was necessary to go. Kargil town was within it. In fact, even as we were in Kargil town, on the other side of the river Kargil, you could see Pakistani bombs falling. So it was a risky move in that sense, but a risky move important enough to send a message of support to the Indian army. We are there with you. Very important that you are not fighting a war by yourself. The whole country, led by the Prime Minister, is behind you.
And then from Kargil, he makes a call to Nawaz Sharif.
No, from Kargil, we went to Srinagar. From Srinagar, he makes a call. I've seen the damage being done. Bombs are falling. This is the Pakistani army fighting. This is not the Mujahideen fighting. He had to be told again and again because he would not believe it. Rightly so. Which Prime Minister would believe that his army is fighting a war and he doesn't know about it or doesn't know full information about it?
Right.
So,
yeah. So you mentioned that even when the proofs were being sent to Nawaz Sharif, he became skeptical that even his room is being tapped. I think that reflects how deep the state is in Pakistan. And want to talk about it?
yeah, exactly. In fact, when we sent the tapes were Musharraf in Beijing talking to his chief of the general staff in the Rawalpindi, and very clear that the Pakistan Navy is fighting the war, and that Mia Sahab, the Nawaz Sharif, does not know enough. The tapes are very clear that he doesn't know enough, and therefore we send the tapes through a courier, through Mr. R.K. Mishra, who was already in talks with Nawaz Sharif's people before the war, through Mr. Niaz Nak on the Pakistani side, and for the Nawaz Sharif was shocked, and therefore to talk, he said, let's take a walk in the garden. There's a very good fruit garden at the back of his house, because he was afraid. This is a prime minister. So that confirmed the fact that the prime minister is afraid to talk in his own house. He's afraid the army has tapped it. You can imagine how deep that state is and how irrelevant is the office of the prime minister. If you think that just because the prime minister of Pakistan wants peace with India, peace with India will happen. No, peace with India will not happen because the Pakistani army will not allow any prime minister to move ahead. That was clear.
Yeah, and you mentioned that there were over 5 to 6 calls between Vajpayee and Nawaz Sharif that took place. So I think Vajpayee was actually betting on his relationship, but as you mentioned, the deep state is too
No,
deep.
it was necessary to make those measures. It was necessary for us to tell Nawaz Sharif that what we are doing is because it's a reaction to what your army is doing. And whatever your army is telling you, they are lying to you. So you, as Prime Minister, must be aware of it. So, that was very necessary to make that conversation with Nawaz Sharif because he, being a Prime Minister of Pakistan, on one hand, will be very happy if Kashmir goes to them. Obviously, any Pakistan Prime Minister would be. But the realization that two nuclear weapons armies are now fighting is a dangerous thing. Obviously, his choices then became limited. And therefore, when the army asked him to go to Washington, he went but with great difficulty. He realized that the army is setting him up for failure. And that's what ultimately happened. So Nawaz Sharif was right in that sense that the army had set him up.
Right. And you also mentioned that the world supported India this time around, and
Yeah.
US specifically, you mentioned. And the current Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, had some role to play in that,
Yeah.
pressure building in the United
Yeah.
States. So can you please talk about it in detail?
Absolutely. The US House of Congress, that subcommittee on South Asia, had agreed on a language which would censor Pakistan, scold Pakistan, not censor, just scold Pakistan. And this was agreed. Mr. Modi had just been appointed the General Secretary of the party. He'd gone to America for the first time, met the Indian community there, very robust people. Dr. Mukul Modi was there, Shekhar Tiwari and others. And they felt that the language was not strong enough. It was not enough. But this already been informally agreed to what happens now. So Mr. Modi was able to use the Indian community, which rose to the occasion for the first time politically, for the first time. And they started sending those, no emails in that sense, popular email, very few emails those days, started sending fax messages to Charles McDermott, the chairman of the committee, his vice chair, one Democrat, one Republican, and the members. So they started getting bombarded with fax messages that Pakistan must be censored, Pakistan must be censored. It has taken USA for a ride because it has, in any case, almost provoked a nuclear war. And if you don't censor it, tomorrow it can go further. Then what happens? So it's necessary to censor Pakistan, and therefore Charles McDermott was very angry with it. The members, some of them, we have already agreed to it. And they said, okay, we'll change your language as per your choice. The committee will defeat it. Not only did the committee accept it by a very big margin, it went to the House of Congress and got passed. Basically, it called upon the United States to prevent Pakistan's access to cheap money from the World Bank, the IMF, the Asian Development Bank, etc. So, to stop a war, to stop a Pakistani army, one step is not enough. We need multiple pronged attacks. This was very important. But Mr. Modi did not get enough credit for it because people didn't know him enough and things changed. But the fact is, to my mind at least, he played a very important role in changing the US administration's policy towards Pakistan at that critical moment.
Right. And you are known to saying that it is easy to start a war, but stopping a war, nobody knows how it will or will it stop or not. And
No.
just a last question on this Kargil war front is, you said that Pakistan was continuously saying that this is not its army, but it was also asking for a ceasefire,
Yeah.
where the irony is lost in a way.
Exactly.
And the second thing that you mentioned is that Pakistan refused to take the bodies of its soldiers
Yeah.
back, which is very shameful. And then the Indian army rose to the occasion. I want to talk briefly about that.
Yes, in fact, Musharraf's own book says that Kargil was a brilliant operation. So on one hand, you claim it's a brilliant operation. On the other hand, during the war, you say we are not fighting. So how can you have a brilliant operation without you fighting? So that hypocrisy is very, very obvious. And because of hypocrisy, what they did to me was the most shameful thing an army can do: betray its dead. They denied there was a Pakistani army, and the Indian army had to fly in Maulvis, a helicopter to 14,000 feet. Very difficult to dig graves there. Somehow dug graves there, conducted rites by Islamic rites, and gave them their war. After all, they are war dead. They require their respect. They may belong to the enemy, but a war dead has to be given respect. Enemy combatants are not to be treated like this. We gave them a dignified burial, which is to show how the Indian army is so different from the Pakistani army.
Right. And Vajpayee ji is very well known for his oratory skills. Like he was very good at conveying his messages and convincing people to understand his thoughts. And I think this skill of him helped him in his second hijack. When he was hijacked for the second time, he convinced the hijacker to let him go, and it worked in his favor. So, would you like to talk a bit about that incident?
Yes, this was very heightened times of the Babri Masjid, and a lot of strong feelings in the country. We have forgotten it. This plane was hijacked, and this person was showing a bomb in his hand that I'll blow up the plane, but I will only talk to Mr. Vajpayee. And in that situation, to go to Mr. Vajpayee, talk to him, persuaded him to surrender, which he did. Later, it was found he was holding a cricket ball. Now, later, at that moment, the whole plane was convinced it was a bomb. So it required tremendous amount of personal courage, which he displayed. But he never talked about it or anything that I'm a great, I did. No, it was just, okay, it was required to be done, I did it. And that, I think, was his ability to talk to a hijacker. Very not easy to talk to a hijacker. Persuade a hijacker and then diffuse the situation, I think, was a remarkable thing.
And now the last chapter that you mentioned in the book is called Reflecting Back. And we want to reflect back by doing a sort of comparison between what happened in 1998-99, where the book is largely situated, and what is happening, let's say, in 2019, 20, 21, 22. I would want to talk about the role of media and how media portrayed Vajpayee and how media currently portrays the present Prime Minister of India.
I will not go into the present very much. I don't. My book in the 99. What I'm simply will tell you is that at that time, Mr. Vajpayee had his critics, very strong critics. I'm not saying they are wrong. They had the point of view. Liberals, people on the left, in the media, analysts, public thinkers, public intellectuals, option papers. And he was used, the language used against him was Hindutva, obviously was there, saffronization, fascist mindset, anti-minority, genocide of minority. So all that was used against Mr. Vajpayee in 98, 99, even before that, some of them even after that. And by 2014, 15, everybody said, oh, what a great liberal Vajpayee was. We loved him and we never opposed him. And my memory is, and I've shown specific articles, same persons, writing very strong language against Mr. Vajpayee then. I said, accusing him of everything. It so happens, maybe it's a coincidence that the same language is used against Mr. Modi also. But I said, my book is not about the present. As you know, Mr. Modi and Mr. Vajpayee, two very different people, different times, different circumstances. And yet the language used against both of them is the same. But today, suddenly people see all virtues in Mr. Vajpayee. Well, why did you see these virtues when he was in power? Why were you using such strong language against him then? And that is why I feel that our public intellectuals and many in the media are not fair. They let their personal prejudice get the better of the factual situation. And later on, they're happy to actually lie and give a different picture altogether. So that was my point on writing that chapter, just to tell people that no, Mr. Vajpayee did not have it easy. He not only had his critics, which he should. A politician without critics is not a politician. He should have his critics. And if you're in power, you should have critics all the more reason, which is fine. The language the critics use is what I want to bring out. And I think I've done that.
Right. Also, the other thing is when you said that he was being talked about as somebody who's saffronizing the country or is anti-minorities, the question of Hindutva does come up. What was Hindutva in Vajpayee's eyes? And was he a secular politician or was he a communal politician in that sort?
See, if you listen to his speech of 1996, where he took the motion of confidence, which he resigned and didn't take it finally, both the initial speech and his rebuttal, he explains Hindutva in a way. He explains secularism. He's saying the first mosque in India was built at the time when the Prophet was still alive in Kerala by a Hindu king who gave land to the Muslims to build a mosque. He says, you don't teach us secularism. He thinks secularism is respect. Secularism means do not allow religion to come into politics. So you have loyalty to your motherland, whatever your method of worship, upasana paddhati, because we don't have a word for religion in India, because religion is a foreign concept to us. We had belief systems, we had schools of philosophies, etc. Whatever your this thing, you respect each other. You never say that mine is superior to yours. Your path is correct for you, is truth for you. My path is truth for me. And hopefully we meet. But we will not run each other down. So that was Hindutva to him, respecting the other side and expecting to be respected in return and not allowing this to factor politics. Politics is about the country, the nation first, the motherland first, the people first. The political beliefs or religious beliefs come secondary to that. And that to me is what people told him, you're the right man in the wrong party. And 92, he said on December 17th in Parliament, he's saying, how can I be the right man in the wrong party? He said, agar phal meetha hai, to ped kharab kaise ho sakta hai? So you have to understand that. And we use the word Hindutva in a very loose sense. One, of course, it's an evolving thing, but at the core is that the motherland comes first, loyalty to the motherland, and then you're free to do what you want to do. Within laws, of course, don't break laws. So that to me was what I understood. I may be wrong. My understood from his speeches and other interactions. It's what I deduce his idea of Hindutva and secularism. And the two go together. So he says our secularism, unlike the West, cannot be anti-religion. In France, in Europe, it is anti-religion. He says ours cannot be anti. The belief system is yours, we'll respect it.
Right. The last question that we'll have on this conversation is about Vajpayee and the Babri demolition that happened. So he reacted very strongly to why it shouldn't have happened. but he also draws a distinction between who made it happen.
Yeah.
So if you can talk brief about that.
Yeah, very much. The demolition happened. People were arrested. Violence broke out. And Vajpayee then moved a motion of no confidence. See, this is how Parliament works. He moved a motion of no confidence against the government, and he spoke on it on 17th of December 1992. He gave the example where these things have happened. He gave the example of Poland, is occupied by the Russians. The Russians had put up their Orthodox church. Poland is a Catholic country. So when Poland got independence, they broke down that church and rebuilt a Roman Catholic church there because it is a sign of the nation. So they wanted it there. So he felt that that was the point. But he said, we've always wanted to get it done through legal means, through negotiations or through the courts. Even then he's saying it's in the courts, we want the courts to give us a judgment, we'll follow the judgment. So the fact that we'll follow the laws, we will not take laws in our hand. Then he explained that if BJP wanted to break down the mosque, the disputed structure, the Vivadit Dhancha as they called it, would the whole leadership of the BJP be standing right there? No, they quietly got it done. Why would we stand in front and get it done? He's saying it's a conspiracy who got it done, and that must be found out. Why are you hiding that? This is that, so he was drawing a distinction between, yes, we want that structure to go, we want a Janambhoomi temple there, but we want to do it through legal means, negotiation or the courts, not unilaterally. And that is what he drew that distinction very strongly in Parliament. And that speech, people have ignored that speech. I would recommend people to read that speech very carefully.
Definitely. And through this conversation, I mean, over 2 episodes, there are a lot of things that we have learned about Vajpayee's tenure. Most importantly, the nuances of things. Rather than just painting a thing as a white or a black, we realized that there were very gray areas which made the situation more complex. We also understood how the things have changed in perception of a particular political leader, but were not the same before. And I think that's where this book comes into picture, that for me, history is about having the benefit of hindsight and then looking at the bigger picture, because when you are very close to what is happening, we might miss out on multiple perspectives. So thank you so much for penning this interesting book down. We are really grateful that you joined us for this conversation and for your time. Thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you. Thanks both of you for the conversation. Thank you very much.
Please like, share and subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for latest updates.